My winter stockpile was a hazard, says HOA. So I opened the spillway for public safety. The night my shed burned, snow was falling sideways. I was on the back porch, boots and a foot of powder, watching orange light lick through the cracks of the door where my winter stockpile used to sit. The wind shoved smoke into my face, bitter and chemical, not like wood stove smoke. Emma was inside, wrapped in 2 blankets on the couch, coughing, cheeks bright red with fever. The thermostat read 58 and dropping. Someone had called my lifeline a hazard. Now it was a pile of hissing, blackened metal and wet, charred logs too soaked to ever burn again. Over the howl of the storm, I could still hear Carol from that afternoon, clear as if she were standing next to me. This is not acceptable. Hank, it's unsafe, it's unsightly, and the board has voted. You will remove this junkyard. Back then, I just folded my arms and said that junkyard is how I keep my daughter warm when the lines go down. She'd smirked, lifted her phone, and snapped pictures anyway. Now the lines were down across half the county. The HOA gate was buried, and my was gone. I watched the glowing beam crack, sag, and finally collapse into snow with a soft, final hiss. They called this public safety, I whispered to myself. Okay, let's talk about public safety. Because what Carol and the HOA didn't know was that I still had something they couldn't burn. My grandfather's old deed and the spillway they'd built their pretty dreams on top of. Stick around. And if stories like this make your blood boil, hit subscribe so you don't miss what came next, because the HOA had no idea who they were pushing into the cold. I should probably tell you how I ended up in that neighborhood in the first place. I'm Hank Johnson. Most folks around here call me Plumber Hank, or, if they're feeling cute, the wealthy redneck. I run a plumbing and heating business out of an old brick garage by the highway. 25 winters of crawling under houses, thawing frozen pipes, and listening to boilers groan taught me 2 hard truths. Water always wins, and New Jersey winters don't care how pretty your HOA brochure looks. When my wife died 5 years ago, it was just me and Emma. That first winter alone, I swore one thing. My kid was never going to shiver because I failed to plan. So I started treating our little Cape-style house like a mission. Insulation, backup generator, stacked firewood, kerosene heater, food, water, meds. I kept a notebook of what we used each storm, adjusted, and stocked more. It wasn't paranoia. It was math. The HOA didn't like math. They liked aesthetics. On paper, our subdivision was Aspen Ridge. In reality, it was a glorified cul-de-sac built along an old farm reservoir. Fancy sign at the entrance, stone columns, overpriced mailboxes, Tesla Chargers and spotless SUVs in every driveway. They sold curated community to people who thought shovels were decorative. I bought there because the price was right after the crash. The school district was solid for Emma, and my granddad had history on that land. He used to point at the low swale behind what's now my fence and say, "That's the spillway, boy. In a thaw, everything drains through there. Don't ever build anything permanent where water used to go." So when I moved in, I did what I always do. Walked the property, checked slopes, found the old concrete lip of the spillway half buried in brush. I clipped the grass, flagged the high and low points, and built my shed not on the spillway, but beside it, on the only high, flat patch that stayed dry even in spring. Inside that shed was my heart rate in January. Stacked cord to season oak, kindling crates, backup propane tanks, salt, sand, spare parts. From the street, it just looked like a dark green box with metal roof, tucked along the back fence. No lights, no junk, no noise. The neighbors met me in that first fall like you meet a curiosity. Big black guy in work boots, pulling up in a beat-up Jeep with a plow on the front, hauling in trailers of split wood. I saw the looks. I'm used to them. "Hey, you do plumbing?" The guy across the street, Dave, asked me one frosty morning while I was unloading pipe wrenches. "Yep, heating too. Commercial residential." He shifted, embarrassed. "You mind taking a look at my boiler?" The guy we had last year kept cutting out. By Christmas, I'd been in half the basements on the street, swapping circulators, bleeding air, explaining in plain English why their radiant floors kept cold spots. I never upsold. I charge fair, show my work. left the job cleaner than I found it. The working people, the delivery drivers, the nurse down the block, the electrician couple, liked me just fine. Carol did not. I first noticed her the way you notice a speed trap. Bright floral jacket against all that white snow. Clipboard like a badge. Phone held horizontal as she walked the sidewalks. She'd stop, frown at a trash can left out an hour too long. Snap a picture. Scribble. Move on. One afternoon, I was out back building the wood rack extension on the side of the shed, setting posts in concrete, checking my levels. I heard a throat clear behind me. "You the new homeowner at 14B?" she asked, voice like she was already tired of my existence. "Just Hank's fine," I said, brushing snow off my gloves. Her eyes slid from my boots to the Jeep to the stacked cords of wood. She tugged her pink leggings up, then raised a clipboard. "I'm Carol, compliance chair for the Aspen Ridge Homeowners Association. We have guidelines about all of this." She did a little circular wave with her pen, taking the shed, the rack, the pallets of firewood. "Guidelines about heat?" I asked, because that's what this is. Heat. "It's about uniformity and safety," she said. "Storage structures must be pre-approved, external fuel sources must be screened, and outdoor items must not create a junkyard aesthetic. Page 6 of your covenant packet." I remembered the packet, 3/4 of an inch thick, full of bolded words about mulch colors and garage door styles. I'd skimmed the parts about noise and parking, filed the rest. "Everything back here is up to county fire code," I said. "Distances, clearances, all that. I do mechanical work for a living." She pursed her lips. Mechanical is not the same as aesthetic compliance. The way she said mechanical made it sound like contagious disease. I could have pushed back then. But Emma needed stability, not another move. The mortgage was good. And, to be honest, part of me thought, fine, let the lady with the clipboard fuss. Winter will remind everybody what matters. For a while, it looked like I might be right. The first cold snap hit, and my chimney smoked steady while the neighborhood Christmas lights flickered on timers. I kept my head down, did my service calls, stacked my wood neat, kept the yard clean. Emma walked to the bus stop each morning in her puffy coat, waving at neighbors who half waved back. And for a time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd found a place where we could be left alone to live our way. Until the first friendly reminder from the HOA showed up in my mailbox, and I realized Carol wasn't just annoying. She was hunting. And that little letter? That was just the appetizer before the main course of crazy. The friendly reminder was printed on thick, expensive paper like it was an invitation to a wedding. Notice of noncompliance. It said in big, bold letters. Under that, unapproved outbuilding and combustible storage visible from adjoining lots. Presence of potential fire hazard and negative impact on community aesthetics. Corrective action required within 14 days. At the bottom, 3 options were nicely bullet-pointed for me like a menu. 1. Remove structure and contents. 2. Relocate structure to HOA-approved area. 3. Submit architectural review request for screening or redesign. Then in italics, failure to comply may result in fines and escalation to local fire authorities. Signed, Carol Myers, compliance chair. I read it twice at the kitchen table, while Emma ate cereal and scrolled her phone. "What's that?" she asked. "Just the fashion police," I said. "They don't like Dad's woodpile." She frowned. "But everyone's always asking you to fix their heat." "Yeah," I said. "They like heat. They just don't like being reminded where it comes from." I could have crumpled the letter. Instead, I slid it into a clear sleeve and dropped in an old 3-ring binder I kept for invoices. Habit. Every job I do, every permit pulled, every inspection, it all lives in a binder. Paper doesn't lie. I decided to be decent about it, at least once. I called the HOA office and asked for a meeting. A week later, I was sitting in a too-warm clubhouse room that smelled like plug-in air fresheners and bad coffee. Carol sat at the end of a folding table with 2 other board members flanking her like junior deputies. Her clipboard was right there, face down like a sidearm. "So, Mr. Johnson," she started, pulling on a pair of reading glasses that had rhinestones on the corners. "This is about the unapproved structure behind your home." "It's a shed," I said. "It's 10 by 12, anchored. Meets county setbacks, metal roof, no power. All fuel stored per code. I've got the county guidelines printed, if you want to see them." One of the board guys, a thin man in a Patagonia vest, shifted in his chair. Carol didn't even glance at the papers. I slid forward. "We're not questioning your expertise," she said, making expertise sound like excuse. "The issue is safety and aesthetics. If a fire were to start back there, it could spread to other properties. And frankly, the large quantity of wood and tanks looks industrial." "It's winter," I said, keeping my voice even. "This is New Jersey, not Florida. That wood is how I keep my daughter warm when the grid gives up. You all remember last year's ice storm?" Patagonia vest guy nodded, eyes softening. Carol cut him off with a glance. "We're not banning heat, Mr. Johnson. We're just asking you to comply like everyone else. Smaller quantities. Approved enclosures. Out of sight. Neighbors are complained." That stuck with me. Neighbors are complained. I walked home slower than usual, ears stinging in the wind, thinking about who had looked over my fence and dialed Carol. I didn't have to wonder long. That night, my phone buzzed. Dave across the street had texted me a screenshot from a neighborhood Facebook group. Carol had posted 3 photos of my shed in carefully stacked wood, taken from just the right angle to make it look chaotic. The caption read, "Concerned about this potential fire hazard and eyesore behind 14B. Thoughts?" Underneath, the comments poured in. "Yikes, looks like a lumberyard. Is that even allowed? Property values, hello?" One woman I'd fixed a leaking water heater for chimed in. "Honestly, I've always felt uncomfortable with all those tanks. What if they explode?" Not one person mentioned that I'd been in half their basements, keeping their pipes from bursting. I put my phone down and stared at the wall for a long minute. Emma came in, saw my face, and peeked at the screen. "Seriously," she said, "you fix their stuff and they call you an eyesore?" "People forget fast when it's warm inside," I said. "Cold has a way of fixing memories." I took a breath and wrote a calm, factual reply in the thread. "Hey folks, Hank here from 14B. Licensed plumber and heating contractor. All my fuel and wood is stored to county fire code, and my shed is on my deeded property, not common area. Happy to show anyone the setup and safety clearances. My priority is keeping my kids safe when storms knock power out. Thanks." I hit send, thinking maybe that would ease things. Instead, Carol answered publicly within minutes. "This is precisely why we have guidelines. Individual choices can create community risk. The board has determined this setup is not acceptable. We will be working toward a resolution. Thank you everyone who privately expressed concern." Private concern. Public shaming. That was the night I realized this wasn't about a shed. This was about control. And somewhere, someone had decided I was a guy they could make an example of. At the time, I still thought I was dealing with a petty neighbor and a pushy HOA. I had no idea that letter was just the first thread in a whole knot of negligence, ego, and stupidity, and that by the time they were done tugging on it, they'd set my lifeline on fire. If you ever had an HOA turn aesthetic concerns into a personal crusade, hit the like button so this story reaches more people who know exactly what this feels like, because this was only their first move. It didn't take long for the friendly reminder to turn into something uglier. A few days after that Facebook thread, I started noticing doors closing when I walked by. Not slamming, just that soft, hurried click people do when they don't want to make eye contact. The nurse down the block, Lisa, waved at me one morning, then seemed to remember something and suddenly needed to check her phone. Her husband, who joked with me about busted sewer lines 2 weeks earlier, just stared at his driveway. Word travels fast in a closed system. Faster when there's someone like Carol pumping it full of gas. The next HOA newsletter hit every inbox with cheery subject line. "Keeping Aspen Ridge safe and beautiful this winter." Buried between snowman contests and "Don't feed the wildlife" was a new section. Combustible storage awareness. There, in grainy black and white, was my shed. "Recently," it read, The board have become aware of dangerous quantities of combustible material being stored improperly within the community. Please remember that such storage not only violates HOA guidelines, but may endanger lives and property. If you see something, say something. No address, no name, but everyone knew. The angle of the fence, the shape of the shed, it was unmistakable. I was clearing my Jeep after light dusting when an Escalade rolled by slower than usual. The driver, a woman I'd pulled out of a snowbank the previous winter, stared at my backyard like it was a crime scene. Her kid pointed. She pulled his hand down. That afternoon at the mailbox cluster, I heard whispers before I even rounded the corner. Can't believe he'd put the whole neighborhood at risk. My insurance agent said if there's a fire back there, we're all... They went quiet when they saw me. One guy, in a Canada Goose Parker that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, cleared his throat. "Hey, Hank," he said, "is it true the fire department flagged your place?" The friendly reminder was printed on thick, expensive paper like it was an invitation to a wedding. Notice of noncompliance, it said in big bold letters. Under that, unapproved outbuilding and combustible storage visible from adjoining lots. Presence of potential fire hazard and negative impact on community aesthetics. Corrective action required within 14 days. At the bottom, 3 options were nicely bullet-pointed for me, like a menu. 1. Remove structure and contents. 2. Relocate structure to HOA-approved area. 3. Submit architectural review request for screening or redesign. Then in italics. Failure to comply may result in fines and escalation to local fire authorities. Signed, Carol Myers, Compliance Chair. I read it twice at the kitchen table while Emma ate cereal and scrolled her phone. "What's that?" she asked. "Just the fashion police," I said. "They don't like Dad's woodpile." She frowned. "But everyone's always asking you to fix their heat." "Yeah," I said. "They like heat. They just don't like being reminded where it comes from." I could have crumpled the letter. Instead, I slid it into a clear sleeve and dropped in an old 3-ring binder I kept for invoices. Habit. Every job I do, every permit pulled, every inspection, it all lives in a binder. Paper doesn't lie. I decided to be decent about it. At least once. I called the HOA office and asked for a meeting. A week later, I was sitting in a too-warm clubhouse room that smelled like plug-in air fresheners and bad coffee. Carol sat at the end of a folding table with 2 other board members flanking her like junior deputies. Her clipboard was right there, face down like a sidearm. "So, Mr. Johnson," she started, pulling on a pair of reading glasses that had rhinestones on the corners, "this is about the unapproved structure behind your home." "It's a shed," I said. "It's 10 by 12 anchored, meets county setbacks, metal roof, no power, all fuel stored per code. I've got the county guidelines printed, if you want to see them." One of the board guys, a thin man in a Patagonia vest, shifted in his chair. Carol didn't even glance at the papers. I slid forward. "We're not questioning your expertise," she said, making expertise sound like excuse. "The issue is safety and aesthetics. If a fire were to start back there, it could spread to other properties. And frankly, the large quantity of wood and tanks looks industrial." "It's winter," I said, keeping my voice even. "This is New Jersey, not Florida. That is how I keep my daughter warm when the grid gives up. You all remember last year's ice storm?" Patagonia vest guy nodded, eyes softening. Carol cut him off with a glance. "We're not banning heat, Mr. Johnson. We're just asking you to comply like everyone else. Smaller quantities, approved enclosures, out of sight. Neighbors have complained." That stuck with me. Neighbors have complained. I walked home slower than usual, ears stinging in the wind, thinking about who had looked over my fence and dialed Carol. I didn't have to wonder long. That night, my phone buzzed. Dave across the street had texted me a screenshot from the neighborhood Facebook group. Carol had posted 3 photos of my shed and carefully stacked wood, taken from just the right angle to make it look chaotic. The caption read, "Concerned about this potential fire hazard and eyesore behind 14B. Thoughts?" Underneath, the comments poured in. "Yikes! Looks like a lumber yard. Is that even allowed? Property values, hello? One woman I'd fixed a leaking water heater for chimed in. Honestly, I've always felt uncomfortable with all those tanks. What if they explode? Not one person mentioned that I'd been in half their basements, keeping their pipes from bursting. I put my phone down and stared at the wall for a long minute. Emma came in, saw my face, and peeked at the screen. Seriously, she said. You fix their stuff and they call you an eyesore? People forget fast when it's warm inside. I said. Cold has a way of fixing memories. I took a breath and wrote a calm, factual reply in the thread. Hey folks, Hank here from 14B. Licensed plumber and heating contractor. All my fuel and wood is stored to county fire code, and my shed is on my deeded property, not common area. Happy to show anyone the setup and safety clearances. My priority is keeping my kids safe when storms knock power out. Thanks. I hit send, thinking maybe that would ease things. Instead, Carol answered publicly within minutes. This is precisely why we have guidelines. Individual choices can create community risk. The board has determined this setup is not acceptable. We will be working toward a resolution. Thank you everyone who privately expressed concern. Private concern. Public shaming. That was the night I realized this wasn't about a shed. This was about control. And somewhere, someone had decided I was the guy they could make an example of. At the time, I still thought I was dealing with a petty neighbor and a pushy HOA. I had no idea that letter was just the first thread in a whole knot of negligence, ego, and stupidity, and that by the time they were done tugging on it, they'd set my lifeline on fire. If you ever had an HOA turn aesthetic concerns into a personal crusade, hit the like button so this story reaches more people who know exactly what this feels like. Because this was only their first move. It didn't take long for the friendly reminder to turn into something uglier. A few days after that Facebook thread, I started noticing doors closing when I walked by. Not slamming, just that soft, hurry click people do when they don't want to make eye contact. The nurse down the block, Lisa, waved at me one morning, then seemed to remember something and suddenly needed to check her phone. Her husband, who joked with me about busted sewer lines 2 weeks earlier, just stared at his driveway. Word travels fast in a closed system. Faster when there's someone like Carol pumping it full of gas. The next HOA newsletter hit every inbox with a cheery subject line. Keeping Aspen Ridge safe and beautiful this winter. Buried between snowman contests and don't feed the wildlife was a new section. Combustible storage awareness. There, in grainy black and white, was my shed. Recently, it read, the board has become aware of dangerous quantities of combustible material being stored improperly within the community. Please remember that such storage not only violates HOA guidelines, but may endanger lives and property. If you see something, say something. No address, no name, but everyone knew. The angle of the fence, the shape of the shed, it was unmistakable. I was clearing my Jeep after a light dusting when an Escalade rolled by slower than usual. The driver, a woman I'd pulled out of a snowbank the previous winter, stared at my backyard like it was a crime scene. Her kid pointed. She pulled his hand down. That afternoon at the mailbox cluster, I heard whispers before I even rounded the corner. Can't believe he'd put the whole neighborhood at risk. My insurance agent said if there's a fire back there, we're all... They went quiet when they saw me. One guy, in a Canada Goose Parker that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, cleared his throat. Hey, Hank, he said, is it true the fire department flagged your place? In the clubhouse window, I could see movement, shapes pacing, a familiar floral jacket in silhouette. My phone chimed in my pocket. New email from the HOA. Due to tonight's dangerous incident involving unapproved combustible storage at 14B, the board will be meeting urgently to discuss enforcement options. Residents, please stay safe and avoid hazardous practices. No offer of help. No, are you and your daughter okay? Just enforcement. I read that line. Dangerous incident involving unapproved combustible storage. And something in me went cold in a way the wind never could. This wasn't an accident to them. This was an opportunity. Inside, the thermostat already read 58 and dropping. Emma's cheeks were flushed, her breath raspy from the smoke that had snuck in. The blizzard outside was just getting started. The power was out. My wood was gone. And the very people who'd hounded me about public safety had made sure the road was impassable when actual help tried to come. That was the night I understood they weren't going to stop. Notes, fines, public shaming. They'd already moved on to something that could have killed us. If I didn't do something smart and do it by their own rules, it wouldn't just be me and Emma paying the price. This machine was going to grind up the next problem neighbor and the next. I went to my kitchen table, laid out the soggy HOA letter, the new email, and my old binder. I flipped to the tab my granddad's deed lived under and traced a line that marked the spillway with my finger. They'd call my lifeline a hazard. Fine. It was time to show them what a real hazard looked like, one written in ink and carved in concrete, not in Carol's little clipboard world. Before I made a move, though, I wanted to hear what you'd do in my boots. Drop a comment with how you'd respond if someone burned your winter safety net. Because what I did next hit them in the only places they cared about, their money and their control. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the cold. I've worked in crawl spaces at 10 below. But because of the anger humming just under my skin. By morning, the house felt like the inside of a fridge. Emma's fever had eased a bit, but her cough was worse. I pushed more blankets on her, set a pot of water on the stove to put some moisture in the air, and told her, I'm going to be at the table. You holler if you need me. Then I went to work. People think blue-collar work is just muscle. Truth is, the only reason guys like me last 25 winters is we learn to think 3 steps ahead. You don't wait for the pipe to burst. You read the temperature, the pressure, the slope, and you fix the weak spot before it lets go. So I treated the HOA like a bad plumbing system. First thing, I pulled out my old banker's box. In went everything. Every notice, every friendly reminder, printout to the Facebook thread, screenshot to the newsletter with my shed in it, Carol's email about my dangerous incident. I printed the fire chief's report request and stapled it to a page. Dates, times, who said what. I even jotted down which neighbors had been outside during the fire, where they'd stood, what they'd filmed. Next, I dug out my grandfather's folder. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the lines were clear. A long, narrow strip behind my property marked drainage easement, and in neat block letters, spillway access retained by owner of Parcel 7. Parcel 7 was my lot. The HOA plat map, the one in their welcome packet, had a cute blue pond drawn over the old reservoir, ringed by common area, with townhouses pressed right up where the overflow used to run. No mention of a spillway, no mention of an easement. I laid the 2 maps on top of each other and held them up to the window. The lines didn't match. My grandfather's spillway line ran right under a row of decorative shrubs and a section of fake wrought iron fence the HOA had installed 3 years ago to make the pond walk more Instagrammable. I could almost hear my granddad's voice. Water remembers, boy, you can pave over the channel, but when it gets a chance, it'll go home. I checked the weather on my phone. Blizzard today, hard freeze tonight, then 3 days from now a warm front with rain. Classic Jersey pattern. Snowpack turned into heavy melt. Storm drains choking, low spots flooding. They called my woodpile a hazard. Fine. Real hazard was a backed-up reservoir with a block spillway and a board too cheap to keep the outlet culvert clear. I'd seen it with my own eyes on dog walks. Trash caught in the grate. Ice building up. Water level high even in mild storms. Here's the thing about easements. They're not suggestions. If a deed says you have a right and the duty to maintain a spillway for drainage, that means if you don't and something floods, it's on you. But if somebody blocks you from doing it after you've warned them, that's on them. For the first time since the shed went up in flames, I felt something like calm. I wasn't just some guy with a ruined stockpile. I was the only person in that subdivision with a legal right and obligation to keep that waterway doing what it was designed to do. I made copies of the deed, the old survey, and the current plat. I highlighted the easement language. Then I drafted 2 letters. The first was to the HOA board, formal, polite, certified mail material. Due to recent events highlighting concerns about public safety and fire risk, I wrote, I have reviewed my deed and related documents. As owner of Parcel 7, I hold recorded spillway access and drainage maintenance rights for the original farm reservoir. Current HOA installations appear to obstruct said spillway. With significant snowpack on site and a forecasted rapid thaw and rain event, I will be inspecting and, if necessary, operating the spillway to prevent property damage and risk to life and safety, pursuant to my deeded rights and obligations. I attach copies of the maps. I close with, please contact me within 48 hours if the board would like to coordinate to ensure compliance with all applicable safety standards. No threats, no chest beating, just facts in writing. The second letter was to the county engineer's office. Shorter, even calmer. I referenced the same easement, noted the block spillway, the HOA-controlled access road that had delayed the fire truck, and requested guidance on best practices for managing imminent meltwater to protect downstream properties. That's the kind of phrase that makes a civil servant sit up straighter. Nobody wanted to be the guy who ignored imminent meltwater in an email when the insurance claims start rolling in. By the time I licked the last envelope, my fingers were numb, but my head was clear. Carol thought this was a game of aesthetics and feelings. Pretty fences, ugly sheds. Safe feelings, dangerous feelings. I was about to move the whole thing onto ground she didn't even know existed. Recorded rights, measurable water levels, timestamps, and a spillway built by men who understood that gravity doesn't care about HOA bylaws. That was the moment, standing over my cluttered kitchen table with my granddad's deed under my hand, that I stopped reacting and started planning. I wasn't going to touch a single board of their precious common area without a paper trail a foot thick and a clock ticking on a forecast they couldn't spin. From here on out, every shovel of snow, every photo, every polite email was going to be part of the system. I just needed proof, real undeniable proof, that they knew about the danger and chose to ignore it. And to get that, I had to go out into the storm and start collecting. The storm outside sounded like a freight train, but I bundled up anyway. If I was going to take on an HOA that worshiped public safety, I needed proof of what real danger looked like in our little snow globe. First stop was the backyard. I slogged through thigh-deep drifts with a tape measure, notebook, and my old carpenter's level in a pocket. The shed was a black carcass half buried in white, but the burn pattern hadn't disappeared. I snapped photos of the padlock, warped and half melted on the ground, instead of hanging on the hasp. Fire doesn't unlock metal, and set it politely in the snow. Someone had. I took closed UPS to the point of origin the fire chief had pointed out. Low outside, away from any ignition source. Boot prints that had been sharp last night were now just soft depressions. But I measured anyway and sketched the angles in my notebook. I got the melted siding, the distance to the fence, the exact separation from the house. Every picture had a timestamp from my phone, and a little note in the margin. Then I turned my light toward the pond. Aspen Ridge liked to call it a lake. But any old farm boy could tell you it was a reservoir with delusions of grandeur. The HOA had strung fairy lights along the path and put in 2 cute benches that nobody used once the mosquitoes came out. Tonight, it was a flat white sheet under a crust of ice, snow whipped into ripples by the wind. I followed the property line to the back corner where my grandfather's map said the spillway throat should be. Sure enough, under a lump of drifted snow and decorative river rock, my boot hit concrete. I brushed it clear with my gloves. There was the old spillway lip, a squared-off channel leading under the fence toward the culvert that dove under the access road. Someone, years ago, maybe, had planted boxwoods right over part of it. Their frozen roots gripped the edge like fingers. Farther down, the HOA's pride and joy, a fake wrought iron fence panel, bolted straight across the low point, with a tasteful little no trespassing. HOA property sign zip-tied in the middle. I laughed out loud, breath steaming. They'd literally installed a decorative plug in the bathtub. I took wide shots, then detail. Bolts through the concrete, the distance from the fence to my deeded line, the no trespassing sign and frame with the pond and my house in the background. I got down on one knee and peered under the fence at the culvert grate. It was a mess. Ice shelf, leaves, a plastic grocery bag, half a soccer ball. The water line on the concrete told its own story. Dark algae stained halfway up the wall, where it had been sitting high even during a normal winter. I reached in with a gloved hand and snapped a close-up of my fingers next to a chunk of ice fused to the grate. Back inside, with Emma dozing on the couch and the wind rattling the windows, I laid my photos out on the table like cards in a game. Shed fire, locked gate in a blizzard, blocked spillway, neglected culvert. Then I pulled up the forecast again. Friday, 38 and rain on top of 30 inches of snow. I didn't need a degree to see it. All that water was going to want out. With the outlet clogged and the spillway fenced like a Pinterest board, the pond would climb until it found the lowest escape route, which, according to my granddad's map, ran straight through the back of the newest row of townhouses. I opened a blank document and started an incident log. January 14th, 2241, structure fire at 14B. 911 delayed due to unplowed HOA road and gated entrance. Fire chief name, notes doesn't look accidental. January 15th, 912, inspection of spillway and culvert. HOA fence and landscaping obstructing deeded drainage easement. Culvert grate partially blocked by debris and ice. Photos attached. Line by line, I married each observation to a time, a place, a picture. I printed the log and slid it into the binder, adding tabs. Fire, drainage, access. Then I picked up the phone, not to rage on Facebook, but to quietly collect more eyes. First, the fire chief. I thanked him again, told him about the HOA email that blamed unapproved combustible storage, and mentioned casually that my security cam had caught motion behind the shed 20 minutes before the flames. Mind if I send you that clip and some stills? I asked. Also got photos of a blocked spillway and access issues for your trucks while there's still snow on the ground. Figured you'd want that documented for your report. He exhaled. Yeah, Hank, sent over. We've had issues with that subdivision before. If there's infrastructure being neglected, county will want to see it. Next, I emailed the county engineer's office with the photos of the culvert and spillway, attaching my deed page and circling the easement language in red. I didn't accuse. I asked, given the forecasted rapid thaw and the observed obstructions, what is the recommended procedure for the easement holder to prevent flooding damage to upstream and downstream properties? That kind of question lives forever in an inbox. If they ignored it and something flooded, the paper trail would lead right back to their desks and to the HOA that had blocked me. By noon, I had automated read receipts popping up on my screen. County engineer, message read. Fire department, attachment opened. My binder had gone from a stack of annoyances to a timeline with outside witnesses. The only person still pretending none of this existed was Carol. Right on schedule, my phone buzzed with a new HOA blast. Residents, please remember, all activity on HOA common property must be pre-approved. Do not attempt to alter drainage structures. Unauthorized actions will be considered vandalism and subject to fine/legal action. Carol, compliance chair. Translation. She got my certified letter, recognized just enough of the words to be scared, and decided to double down instead of listening. Perfect. I screenshotted that email and slid it into the binder under a fresh tab labeled Notice. Now I had proof that she'd been told there was a risk, that she told everyone to leave alone, and that, when the county eventually came knocking, her own words would hang her. All that was left was to give the board one more clear, written chance to do the right thing, and when they didn't let gravity and the calendar finish the job. Before I set the last part of the trap, I looked over at Emma, asleep under a pile of blankets, and reminded myself why I was doing this. Not just to win, but to make sure nobody else ever froze because some bored compliance chair liked playing God with other people's safety. If you're still with me and you've ever had to quietly stack receipts while someone in power thought you were too simple to fight back, hit that subscribe button. Because the way I baited them next made sure their own arrogance became Exhibit A. 2 days later, the storm broke like a fever. Sun came out, sky went hard blue, and all that snow turned heavy and mean. You could hear it sliding off roofs in wet avalanches. Gutters dripped in a constant silver curtain. I stood at my back window, coffee in hand, watching the pond rise inch by inch against the ice crust. The forecast on my phone said what I already knew. Rain moving in this afternoon. Rapid melt. Localized flooding possible in low-lying areas. Low-lying areas. like a reservoir whose spillway had been turned into a lawn ornament. That morning, a certified letter from the HOA finally landed in my mailbox. I opened it at the kitchen table. Mr. Johnson, your correspondence regarding so-called spillway rights has been reviewed. Any attempt to alter HOA common property, including drainage structures, will be considered vandalism and a violation of community safety rules. Cease and desist. For public safety, residents are instructed to stay off snow-covered common areas. Carol Myers, compliance chair. She'd underlined public safety. Twice. Perfect. I slid that letter into my binder, right behind my deed copy. Then I printed one more email. This one I'd sent an hour earlier to county engineer, the fire chief, and the HOA board, all CC'd together. Given current melt conditions and forecasted rain, water level in the historic reservoir is approaching the obstructed spillway. As deeded easement holder, I will be on site at 1,400 hours to inspect and, if necessary, clear the spillway to prevent damage to upstream/downstream properties. All actions will be documented for public safety. There was in black and white. They'd been warned when and what I was going to do. Nobody could say they didn't see it coming. At 1:45 p.m., I pulled on my green jacket, yellow gloves, and boots. Emma, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, looked up, worried. You going out? Just checking something for the neighborhood. I said, you stay put. If anyone comes knocking, you don't open the door unless it's a badge or you hear my voice, okay? She nodded, lip pinched between her teeth. She'd been through enough already. Whatever happened next, I wanted it out back, not on my front porch. The snow had sunk a good 6 inches, turned to slush over a hard base. The pond was no longer a flat white plate. Dark water showed through around the edges, lapping higher than I'd ever seen it. The line on the concrete was already under. I walked the property line slow, phone in hand, filming as I narrated. January 18th, 13:55 hours. Water level at spillway lip approximately 3 inches below decorative fence. HOA landscaping obstructing historical drainage. Forecast calls for additional 1 to 2 inches of rain on existing snowpack. You talk like that long enough on job sites, it becomes second nature. Inspectors like specifics, not vibes. At the corner, I panned up to show the row of shiny new townhouses behind the pond, their back decks jutting over what used to be the overflow path. Then I swung back to the fake wrought iron fence bolted across the spillway. On cue, I heard the crunch of boots on the frozen snow. Mr. Johnson. Carol's voice carried before I saw her. She waddled down the path in her floral jacket. 2 board members in tow. Phones already out. I hope you got my letter. I did, I said, not stopping my slow pan. And I hope you got my email. One of the guys, Patagonia vets from the meeting, looked nervous. What are you planning on doing exactly? Exactly what my deed says I can. I answered, inspect and operate the spillway so your pretty little pond doesn't climb into those living rooms. I pointed at the townhouses. Carol laughed, high and brittle. You are not touching HOA property. This area is closed for public safety. I will call the police. Please do, I said. Make sure you tell them I notified you in the county 45 minutes ago that water was approaching a blocked drainage structure. I tilted my phone so her face and the fence were in the same frame. Smile for the incident log. She yanked her hood tighter. You don't have authority here. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the plastic sleeve copy of my grandfather's deed and the map, and held it up so her camera could see. Parcel 7. Spillway access retained by owner. That's me. You've been sitting on top of someone else's safety valve for 3 years and calling it landscaping. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't actually read the thing. She just assumed the HOA plat was gospel. Behind us, there was a sharp crack as a sheet of ice on the far side of the pond let go and slumped. Water surged just an inch, but enough to slap audibly against the concrete lip at our feet. Patagonia vest swallowed. Carol. I checked my watch. 13:59. Time to stop talking and let the water do what was built to do. I walked up to the fence, laid my yellow-gloved hands on the cold metal, and spoke clear for every camera and body mic around. For the record, I am now exercising my deeded spillway access to relieve dangerous water levels created by HOA obstructions. This is for public safety. Then I grabbed my socket wrench from my pocket, the same one I use on boiler flanges, and put it on the first anchor bolt. It squealed as it turned. Rust flaked, metal protested, but it moved. One bolt, then another. Each clank echoed off the ice like a countdown. Carol sputtered into her phone. "Yes, operator. We have a homeowner vandalizing." The third bolt let go with a snap. I braced my boots, gave the fence panel a hard shove. It tilted, then fell outward in slow motion, crashing into the snow and exposing the full throat of the spillway. Water, dark and hungry, surged forward, nosing over the concrete and into the channel like it had been waiting years for someone to stop pretending it didn't exist. As it rushed on the now visible grate, dragging slush and debris with it, every phone in that little cluster was pointed at me. What none of them realized yet was that the most important lenses aimed at that scene weren't in Carol's hands at all. They were sitting on desks at the county and the fire department, waiting to see what Aspen Ridge did next when nature finally showed up to audit their aesthetics. And when the board decided to turn this into a spectacle instead of a quiet fix, they gave me exactly the overreaction I needed to finish the case against them. By the time the first cruiser rolled up, the spillway was singing. Water hissed through the channel, brown and fast, carrying slush twigs and 3 years of HOA neglect right under that culvert. The pond had already dropped a couple inches, but not before it had nosed high enough to lick the bottom of the townhouse decks. The cop stepped out, boots crunching, hand on his belt. He took in a fallen fence, the rushing water, Carol waving her arms like she was directing traffic on a runway. "Officer," she cried, "arrest him. He just destroyed HOA property and put everyone at risk." I kept my phone steady. "Afternoon, officer. Name's Hank Johnson, Parcel 7. Before we get into anything, you should know the county engineer and the fire chief are CC'd on my notice about this. It's in your system by now." He gave me a look that said, "Please don't make this my problem," then keyed his radio. While he waited, his gaze drifted to the water slamming happily through the unobstructed spillway. "You open that up?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Deeded spillway access." I held out the plastic sleeve map and deed. They bolted a fence over a drainage easement. Reservoir was about to overtop into those basements. Behind us, there was a sharp crack. Everyone turned. The farthest townhouse, Unit 23D, the one with the Instagram-ready patio set, had a sheen of water against its back foundation, meltwater that had already pooled ankle-deep before I pulled the plug. 2 neighbors stood on the deck in socks, staring down at a kiddie pool where there shouldn't have been one. Patagonia vest muttered, "Holy," and shut his mouth. The cop's radio squawked. He listened, nodded once, then turned to Carol. "Ma'am, dispatch confirms there's an open file on a block spillway and emergency drainage. County's got your HOA under review. So for now, nobody's getting arrested for taking bolts out." Carol went red. "He can't just dismantle our improvements. We had bids, plans." "Did you have a permit to block a recorded easement?" I asked, nice and calm, because the county engineer is going to want to see that right after he looks at the delayed fire response from 3 nights ago. The officer coughed into his fist. "Look, this is above my pay grade. I'm filing an incident report. Both of you can add your statements and documents. In the meantime, nobody touches anything else without the county here. Clear?" Carol opened her mouth to argue. Just then, another figure came slogging up the path, yellow hard hat under his arm, county logo on his jacket. I almost smiled. "Afternoon, Mike." He squinted at me. "Hank, you weren't kidding in that email." His eyes tracked from the surging spillway to the high water line on the concrete, the fence panel in the snow, the townhouses. "Jesus." Carol pounced. "Are you with the county? Good. You need to see what he did." He took it upon himself, too. Mike held up a hand, already digging a folder from his bag. "Ms. Myers, right? We spoke on the phone about access issues last spring?" Her face flickered. "Briefly." "Right. So, Per your covenants, your HOA is responsible for maintaining this reservoir per the original drainage plan. He flipped open a copy of the same old map I had, which includes the spillway, which you have creatively redecorated. One of the bored guys groaned under his breath. Mike walked to the edge, measured the scum line with a tape. We got your residents' photos of the block grate, by the way. He nodded at me. If he hadn't opened this, you'd be looking at water in those lower units within the hour. Maybe worse if the culvert ice let go all at once. Carol tried again, but he vandalized. Ma'am, Mike cut in, voice flat now. What he did was restore function to a mandated safety feature. What you did was obstruct it, on paper. He tapped his folder. Emails, Platts, your do not touch notice that went out after he warned you. If I were you, I'd stop saying public safety, unless it's followed by lawyer. The little crowd went very, very quiet. A couple phones lowered. Lisa, the nurse, who'd been hanging back, met my eye for the first time in weeks and mouthed, "Thank you." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Here's how this is going to go. Mike continued. I'm flagging this entire drainage system for formal review. Your board will receive a notice of violation and a corrective action plan. Any flood damage claims from these units? He nodded toward the damp townhouse line. The adjusters are going to see my report with your emails attached. Carol looked like she'd swallowed a snowball. You can't pin this on us. We were trying to keep things safe. By blocking an overflow and delaying fire trucks with an unplowed private road, Mike raised an eyebrow. Ms. Myers, safety isn't feeling. It's measurements and maintenance. And from what I'm seeing, Mr. Johnson's the only one out here doing either. Patagonia vest finally found his spine, just not in the direction Carol expected. Carol, he said quietly, did you know about that easement? She stammered. That the developer's map didn't show. So you didn't check the underlying deed before we landscaped? Before we put townhouses there? His voice rose a notch. And you threatened to find the one guy who actually understands how this stuff works. Mike snapped photos of everything. The fallen fence, the rushing spillway, Carol's public safety letter I handed him, carefully preserved in its plastic sleeve. The officer closed his notebook, looking almost relieved. I'm listing this as civil dispute, no arrest. County will take it from here. He looked at me. You got somewhere warm for your girl? We're managing, I said. As long as nobody burns my backup heat this week, we'll be fine. His jaw tightened. He'd read the fire report. As people drifted off, the neighborhood looked different. Same siding, same porches, but the spell was broken. Folks weren't just glancing at my yard anymore. They were staring at the pond, at the fence bits in the snow, at the woman who'd spent all winter telling them she was a guardian of public safety. And now here she was, standing in front of a rushing spillway she didn't know existed, with the county literally holding a file that said, in so many words, this was on you, exposing them in front of the cop, and the county was satisfying, sure. But watching the board and the neighbors realize in real time that their hazard wasn't my shed, it was the HOA they trusted that hit them in the only two places that matter in a subdivision, their wallets and their illusion of control. And calling them out on the ice with cameras, rolling was only phase one, because once the reports landed and the insurance companies saw who'd ignored warning after warning, the real pain for the HOA was just getting started. If you've ever wanted to stand up at a meeting and lay out every receipt you've collected on people like this, tell me in the comments how you'd have handled that spillway moment, because what happened next is where the board's power finally cracked for good. You'd think that once the county guy dressed Carol down at the spillway, that would be the end of it. You don't know HOAs. 2 weeks later, after the thaw, I got a thick envelope on fancy letterhead. Aspen Ridge Homeowners Association versus Henry Johnson. They'd actually hired a lawyer. The accusations were wild. Unauthorized alteration of common property, endangering residents, and my favorite, creating a nuisance resulting in flood risk. They wanted fines, legal fees, and an order forcing me to restore their decorative fence over the spillway. I put the letter down and laughed. Emma looked up from her homework. What now? They're suing me, I said, for stopping their pond from drowning the townhouses. She rolled her eyes. Of course they are. Court was in a beige county building with bad carpet. On their side, Carol in her floral jacket over a too-tight blouse, the HOA attorney in a crisp suit, and Patagonia vest looking like he hadn't slept in a month. On my side, just me in a clean work shirt, my green jacket draped over a banker's box full of binders. The judge, a tired woman with reading glasses halfway down her nose, flipped through the complaint. "Mr. Johnson, you understand allegations?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, and I brought some context. The HOA lawyer went first, painting a picture of a rogue homeowner tampering with carefully designed amenities and instigating dangerous drainage changes. Carol dabbed her eyes at all the right moments, whispering public safety like it was a magic spell. When it was my turn, I didn't make a speech. I opened the box. "Your Honor," I said, sliding the first binder forward, "this tab is every notice and email the HOA sent me about my hazardous shed. Dates, pictures, their newsletter encouraging neighbors to see something, say something. This tab is a fire report from when that shed burned in the middle of a blizzard, plus photos of the unplowed private road and a delayed truck. This," I continued, opening the second binder, "is my grandfather's deed. It predates the subdivision. You'll see the Spillway access language highlighted. Behind it is the current plat the HOA used, with that Spillway conveniently missing. Next tab, my certified letters to the board, warning them the Spillway was blocked and a thaw was coming. Their response? I held up Carol's cease and desist for public safety, telling me not to touch it. And lastly, I said, sliding over a folder stamped with a county seal, is the engineer's report, photos of the block culvert, measurements of high water marks, and his conclusion: if that fence hadn't come down, at least 4 units would have flooded. The judge read in silence for a long time. The only sound was pages turning, and Carol's breathing getting louder. Finally, the judge looked over her glasses at the HOA table. "Ms. Myers, your association installed a fence and shrubs over recorded drainage easement without verifying title or permits." Carol opened and closed her mouth. The lawyer tried to step in. "Your Honor, the developer isn't here," the judge snapped. "You are. You enforce these conditions. You threatened this man with fines and public safety while ignoring his documented concerns. Then, after the county engineer thanks him in writing for preventing flood damage, you sue him?" She turned to me. "Mr. Johnson, did you receive any compensation for opening that spillway?" "No, ma'am. I just didn't feel like watching my neighbors' kids wade through their living rooms." A corner of her mouth twitched. "The court finds the HOA's complaint not only without merit, but chilling. The case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering Aspen Ridge HOA to reimburse Mr. Johnson for his documented costs related to this incident, mailings, damage assessments, and the destroyed fence he was forced to remove for, and I quote, public safety." The lawyer shifted. "Your Honor, regarding the shed." "Oh, we're not done," she said. "I'm referring the fire incident and road access issues to the state fire marshal and the attorney general's office. If your association's neglect or actions contributed to delayed emergency response or that fire, you may be facing more than civil liability." Carol went white. Patagonia vest sank in his chair. On my way out, he caught up to me in the hallway. "Hank," he said quietly, I'm stepping down. Half the board is. We voted last night to suspend fines on you and to hire a real engineer to redo the drainage. I should have listened sooner." I nodded. Listening's cheap. Flood remediation isn't. But I appreciate it. By spring, the fallout hit where it hurts an HOA most. Insurance premiums for the whole subdivision spiked after the county marked them high risk due to drainage negligence. The board had to announce a special assessment, not for my vandalism, but to rip out the landscaping, enlarge the spillway, and install a proper access road for fire and maintenance vehicles. Fines against me? Wiped clean in a membership meeting, where nobody could look me in the eye. Carol? She tried to cling to her title, But when the state fire marshal's investigation started sniffing around that shed fire, asking for camera footage, gate logs, and every email where she'd label my legal stockpile a hazard, suddenly her resignation letter hit everyone's inbox. Personal reasons. Sure, the new interim board knocked on my door a few weeks later with a fruit basket and a carefully worded apology. We, could use your input on the new safety committee, one of them said, sheepish. I smiled. I'll send you a written list of what needs to be fixed, for free. After that, you call actual inspectors and contractors. I'm done working for exposure. They nodded like kids who'd just been grounded. From then on, my Jeep could sit out with the plow on. My rebuilt shed, constructed with stamped plans and a fire marshal sign-off, stood exactly where it belonged. Nobody said a word when I stacked my wood high that fall. A couple neighbors even asked my opinion on backup heat. Funny how fast eyesore turns into resource once the bill for pretending physics doesn't exist comes due. Watching their fines evaporate and their power shrink wasn't about gloating for me. It was about knowing that the next time snow buried that gate, somebody on that board will remember the night my shed burned, the water rose, and the man in work boots with a binder kept their basements dry. And they'd think twice before calling survival a hazard again. If you're glad to see an HOA actually pay real consequences instead of just sending another nasty gram, hit the like button, because there was still one more thing I needed to do before I could finally call this war over. Summer came late that year. One June evening, I was on the back porch with Emma, watching the sun hit the new spillway. No fake fence this time, just clean concrete, a bigger throat, and a metal catwalk for maintenance, all signed off by the county. You could still see the faint shadow where their decorative panel had been bolted in. Looks kinda naked, Emma said, licking a popsicle. Yeah, I said, that's how safety's supposed to look. Boring. Behind it, the pond was a normal, lazy green instead of bathtub filled to the rim. The townhouses had fresh paint along the foundations where the water line used to show. Insurance money at work. My new shed sat in its old spot, taller, metal vented, with a stamped inspection sticker by the door. Inside, stacked cords of oak, labeled crates of kindling, CO2, and smoke detectors. Backup tanks chained in space exactly like the fire marshal's diagram. He'd come out himself for the final sign-off, looked around, nodded once, and said, "This is safer than half the McMansions I inspect." Then lower, "You keep your cameras backed up, Hank. People like you make my job easier." Word got around. Lisa the nurse started waving again. The delivery guy stopped to ask about generators. Even the Escalade family, who once stared at my yard like it was a crime scene, had me over to look at their sump pump. "Why'd you help us?" the husband asked, embarrassed, standing beside his too-clean toolbox. "After everything." I shrugged, because my kid walks past your house to school. I'd rather she not need a canoe. Carol was the only ghost left. She sold fast, below market. Rumor was a combination of higher dues, insurance hikes, and a certain letter from the Attorney General's office spooked her. I never saw her moving truck. One day the floral jacket was just gone. The new family that bought her place planted tomatoes where her clipboard throne used to be. The board rewrote the rules that fall. The new packets had words like life safety, access, and maintenance standards bolded. A whole section on drainage, with the county diagrams to back it up. My name wasn't on any of it. But when they talk about consulting qualified tradespeople, half the room glanced at me. I kept my distance. I'd send the occasional email when I saw trash in the culvert. Photos, timestamps, for your records. Old habits die hard. They always wrote back, "Thank you. We'll address this immediately." And for once, they actually did. Emma grew that year. Not just taller, steadier. She started helping me split wood, learn how to bleed a radiator, how to read a forecast, and know when a storm was more than just pretty snow. "Do you ever wish we just moved?" she asked one night, sitting on the tailgate while we watched the first flakes of a new winter drift down. I thought about it, about the nights I'd stared at listings, at apartments far from ponds and HOAs and burned sheds. Sometimes, I said, but then I think about what would have happened if nobody here knew what that spillway was, or cared. I nudged her boot with mine. Leaving wouldn't have fixed that. Just would have made it someone else's problem. She was quiet for a second, so we stayed and fixed it. Exactly. Inside, the house was warm. Not because the thermostat said so, but because the stack of wood in the shed was dry. The generator was tested. The pipes were insulated, and the road out front was finally on a real plow contract the board couldn't cheap out on without the county breathing down their necks. I don't kid myself. Rules can be good. Communities need standards. But there's a line between keeping things tidy and playing God with people's survival. The first kind of rule, make sure the spillway is clear before the rain. The second kind bolts a fence over it and calls it curb appeal. In Aspen Ridge, enough folks got a cold, wet lesson to tell the difference. So now, when a new neighbor moves in and grumbles about the covenant packet, sometimes I'll hand them a mug of coffee, point at the pond, and say, "Before you roll your eyes, let me tell you a story about a fence, a flood, and a woman who thought a clipboard could beat gravity." They usually listen. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's currently appearing on your screen.